Story 1. Watch what you sell. Back when I was 24, my girlfriend at the time, Laura, decided I needed something flashy for my birthday, so she bought me a really nice, expensive watch. Her family was rolling in money, so she didn't even blink at dropping that kind of cash. But for a guy like me, it was overkill. We split up eventually, and she didn't even think to ask for it back. Maybe for her it was just a drop in the bucket. A couple of years later, I stumbled upon it in a drawer I had thrown it in and forgot about. After our breakup, I never wore it. It felt like a leftover from a past life, but it was still worth a good chunk of change, and I was wanting to buy a new car, something that fit me better than a flashy watch ever did. Selling the watch seemed like the smart move. It would be a couple of dollars I could drop in the bank to go towards saving up for the car. I snapped a couple of pics and posted it on Craigslist. I set the price high, figuring I'd come down if I had to. I didn't really expect to get what I was asking for, but it was worth a shot. The next day, I got a message from a woman. She was very sweet and sincere. She was interested in buying the watch for her husband's birthday. She told me how much they were in love, and how perfect my watch would be for him. Her story was heartwarming, and honestly, it made me kind of miss what I had with Laura before things got rocky. She asked if she could come by and pick it up from my place. Now, I'm not usually down for letting strangers know where I live, but she had a way of making me feel like I knew her. There was something about the way she talked about her husband that made me let my guard down. So I gave her my address and we set a time for her to come by. She thanked me, said she couldn't wait to see the watch, and made me feel pretty good about myself. The day we agreed upon rolled around, and I waited and waited. But she was a no-show. I messaged her, trying not to sound as stood up as I felt, but nothing. No reply, no explanation. I tried to not let it get to me, but it stung more than I expected. I decided to give it a day or two to allow her time to message me back. Who knows, I thought to myself. Maybe she had an emergency or something. My thoughts about the whole ordeal would change drastically, though. Later that night, I was jolted awake by a strange noise coming from my back door. I looked at the clock, and it was a little bit after 2 a.m. Somewhat alarmed, I listened carefully as I got up out of bed. I slowly crept down the hall, hoping my mind was just playing tricks on me. But it wasn't. The sound I was hearing was the jiggle of my back door handle. Before I could process that something was really happening, there was a huge bang. I knew right then someone was breaking into my house. Panic isn't even the word for what I felt. My mind raced, thinking about what I should do. I knew that somebody was already in my house, and I remember thinking to myself, if I called the cops now, it'd be too late by the time they arrived. So the only thing that I could think to do was something kind of crazy. I flipped the light to the hall on and shouted out the biggest lie of my life. In the loudest, most intimidating voice that I could muster up, I yelled that I had a gun and that the cops were on their way. The best chance I've got, I thought to myself, was to try to scare this person away. Luckily for me, it worked. I could hear scrambling, stuff getting knocked over, and then the sound of someone running out the back. As I ran back to my room to grab my phone and dial the cops for real, I took a look out of my bedroom window, just in time to see a huge man booking it through the neighbor's yard. As I explained the situation to the operator, I could see a car tearing down the next street over as fast as it could go. Unfortunately for me, it was too dark to make out any details. The cops showed up and did their jobs. They asked questions and took notes, but it was clear that they weren't going to have a lot to work with. Nothing was taken, so for me, it felt like nothing was going to come of it, and nothing ever did. Reflecting back, I'm pretty sure it was a Craigslist scammer. There was no sweet woman with a story, just someone looking for an easy score from a person naive enough to fall into the trap. They didn't get the watch, but unfortunately, they took my peace of mind. I learned a tough lesson that night. I keep my dealings strictly public now. Meetups are in public places with lots of people. As for the watch, I eventually just pawned it off at a shop to get something for it and not have to deal with it anymore. The whole ordeal was a tough way to learn that not everyone is who they say they are, and that sometimes the price of trust is just way too high. Story 2. Disturbing download. I've always been a bit of a penny pincher, you know? It's not that I'm cheap, I just like to think I'm careful with my money. So when my computer finally bit the dust, I figured I'd roll the dice on a used laptop instead of shelling out big bucks for a shiny new computer. Craigslist was my go-to, the classifieds of the internet where you could find just about anything for less. After scrolling through a sea of listings, one caught my eye. Decent specs, not too old, and the price was right. Perfect, I thought, and shot the seller a message. We agreed to meet up the next day. Upon arrival, I could tell that the guy that I was meeting up with was off. He was the type that stared at you just a little too long, making the hairs on your neck stand up. He was this lanky guy, tall and pale like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes were these piercing little beads that seemed to look right through you, and his hair was a greasy mop that hung over his forehead. But he had the computer with him, and it looked to be in good shape. After firing it up to make sure that it actually worked, I handed over the cash, trying not to think too much of his clammy grip when we exchanged the goods. When I got home, I hooked it up, eager to see if it worked as well as he'd claimed. Again, it booted up fine, and everything seemed normal at first. But as I poked around, trying to get a feel for my new purchase, I found something odd. Buried deep in a maze of folders was one that was titled Dolls. It was the creepiest thing I've ever laid my eyes on. It was full of, well, photos of dolls, but not the kind you'd find in a toy store. These were mutilated, twisted into grotesque shapes, some with limbs torn off, others with their eyes gouged out. It was like a digital graveyard of plastic and porcelain, over 900 of them, each one creepier and more disturbing than the one before. I sat there for a second, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. Did the guy purposely leave this here to freak me out? I wondered. Or was this some kind of sick fetish that he was into? The guy was weird, sure, but this was another level. I couldn't tell, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I delved a little deeper, curiosity getting the better of my initial shock. The computer's search history was like a descent into insanity. Websites selling dolls, but not the kind you'd give to your kid. Forums discussing the modification of dolls in ways that made my stomach turn. And then there were other sites, ones I won't even describe. Nothing looked outright illegal, just disturbing. I couldn't bring myself to contact that guy again. Every time I thought about meeting that man, the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. Not wanting to have another encounter with the guy, I decided to wipe the computer clean, scrub it of every byte of data that it ever housed before it came into my possession. I spent hours on it, making sure nothing of the previous owner remained. Even after the clean slate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lingering in that machine, like a residue of the previous owner's unsettling presence. It's silly, I know. I tried using it for about a month but couldn't shake the images and the creepy man out of my head. In the end, I ended up spending the money to purchase a brand new computer. So much for saving a few dollars. It's been years, but I can't help but wonder about the man who sold me the computer. Who was he? Why did he have those photos? Was it all just an innocent, albeit weird hobby? Or was there something more sinister going on behind his too wide smile and those disturbing images? Story 3. Stay inside. Don't let them see you. My wife and I were excited to move into a new house right after we got married. It was a beautiful 2-story home in an equally beautiful neighborhood. There was only one thing that we didn't like about it. An old rusted swing set in the backyard that looked like it belonged in a horror movie, rather than a family home. It was such an eyesore and mowing around it was difficult. We decided it had to go. Neither of us had the time or the tools to dismantle it, so I figured Craigslist was the answer. I posted an ad. Free swing set, must dismantle and haul away. A few hours later, my phone dinged with a response. Some guy said he'd take it off our hands and could come by that day. Perfect, I thought. I was glad to be rid of it. I provided our address and waited. At the designated time, I could see an old beat-up truck making its way into the neighborhood. It was loud, blew smoke, and creaked like it was on its last legs. Inside were 2 rough-looking men and a large, skittish-looking dog. The 2 guys got out, one of them holding onto the dog's leash. I greeted them with a nod and a slight wave, trying to ignore the alarm bells in my head. "The gate's open," I said. "I'll meet you around back." I went inside quickly and told my wife about the men and how they gave me a bad vibe. "Just stay inside," I said, "and whatever you do, don't let them see you." I waited a few minutes and then went back out, trying to keep my cool. One of the guys was already working on the swing set, wrenching it apart with his tools. The other, this big burly dude with a scar running down his cheek, was just standing there, watching the guy, and watching me. He stood there with one hand wrapped around the leash, and the other wrapped around a large bottle of water. While the burly guy stood there, I walked over to the other guy to help him dismantle the swing set. I guess in my mind, I thought the sooner this thing gets dismantled, the sooner these guys get out of here. As I worked away, I kept an eye on the burly dude standing by the entrance to the gate. Then suddenly, the burly guy set the water bottle down and reached into his pocket. When he pulled his hand out, my heart nearly stopped. He was holding a pocket knife. Slowly and methodically, he reached back down for his water bottle. Using the knife, he cut the water bottle in half, producing a makeshift bowl for the dog. As the dog slurped away at the water, the man slowly folded the knife back up and placed it back into his pocket. The whole series of events, the way he reached into his pocket, the way he slowly sliced the bottle, and the way he slowly placed the knife back into his pocket, set me on edge. Then, out of nowhere, his eyes darted over at me. "Yo," he called out. "Can I use your pisser?" he asked. Every part of me was screaming no. There was no way in hell I was letting him into my house with my wife. Taken off guard, I stumbled over my words but managed to say, "I prefer not." He didn't take that well. His face twisted up and he spat out, "What, you want me to piss in your yard then?" The situation was spiraling fast. I tried to explain, saying I didn't mean any offense, but it was like trying to stop a train, already barreling down the tracks. The dog, sensing his owner's anger, began growling and darting back and forth on the leash. "I didn't mean it like that," I said to the burly guy. But it didn't matter. The guy was triggered and had gone from 0 to nuclear in a hurry. The guy started throwing curses my way, and the dog was just as nuclear as his owner now, barking loud enough to wake the dead. Then his hand went into his pocket, where I knew the knife was. My heart pounded, and mind raced with every headline I'd ever read about Craigslist encounters gone wrong. Just as I was thinking that this was about to end very badly, thankfully, the other guy dropped his tools and stepped in, trying to calm his friend down. But it only made things worse. The angry guy turned on him, hurling insults and curses. I felt like I was out of options. "Leave now or I'm calling the cops," I yelled. That set the angry guy off even more, but his friend, who seemed to be the only thing between me and a very bad ending, somehow convinced him, and his crazy canine, that it was time to go. As they headed back towards the truck, the burly dude chucked the remaining half of the water bottle that he had at my car, leaving a resounding thud that reverberated over the dog's barks. Finally, thankfully, they left, leaving the dismantled swing set scattered across the yard. I stood there shaking until I couldn't hear the truck's engine anymore. My wife came out, pale-faced and worried. "Are they gone?" she asked. I nodded my head up and down with a sigh of relief. We didn't finish taking the swing set down. It stayed there, half torn apart, until we could get someone we knew to help with it. From that day on, I swore off Craigslist for anything that required a home visit. Some lessons you learn the easy way, and some you learn by making bad decisions. This was definitely the latter.